This check isn't worth the ash it's about to become. Richard Whitmore held the paper between two fingers like it carried disease, his gold nameplate catching the cold lobby light. General Manager. Across the black stone counter stood James Carter, a black man in a plain charcoal jacket, hands open at his sides, eyes steady. Beside him lay a worn brown envelope, a false withdrawal form, and the check Richard had already declared fake without finishing the scan. A few wealthy clients turned from the velvet waiting chairs. One teller stopped typing. Richard flicked a silver lighter open. The flame kissed the corner of the check. Paper curled. Under the heat, 3 pale letters shimmered inside the fibers. C. T. H. James did not reach for it. He only said, quietly, "You should have scanned it first." Behind Richard, somewhere inside the steel vault wall, something gave a soft, electronic beep. Richard didn't hear it. Or maybe he refused to. He smiled harder, because men like Richard Whitmore had spent years mistaking volume for truth. "Don't try to educate me," he said, lifting the burning edge higher so the room could see it. "I run this floor." The lobby of Harrington National's private banking division was not built for scenes like this. It was built for silence, polished shoes, whispered transfers, old money sitting behind glass walls. The air smelled faintly of leather and lemon oil. Security cameras hid in dark half-domes above the marble columns. A massive circular vault door stood at the rear of the room, brushed steel and black glass, its digital panel asleep beneath the bank's crest. People came here to hide wealth, not to watch a man be humiliated for trying to prove his own. But now every head had turned. An older woman in pearls lowered her coffee cup without drinking. A man in a navy suit paused with his phone against his ear. 2 tellers looked at each other, then looked down. Nobody wanted to be the first person to say this was wrong. Richard tapped the half-burning check over a small metal tray beside his monitor. Ash fell in soft black flakes. On the counter beside it, the brown envelope sat with faded handwriting facing the ceiling. Carter promise. Richard had not bothered to read it. He had only laughed at it. "You walked in here with no appointment, I recognize. No private banker standing beside you. No documentation that makes sense, and this ridiculous piece of paper." He looked James up and down, lingering on the worn cuffs of his jacket. "Did you really think we'd be stupid enough to cash it?" James's jaw moved once, not in fear, not in anger, but restraint. "I didn't ask you to cash it," he said. "I asked you to verify it." "Verify?" Richard laughed, sharp and empty. That's a word people use when they've watched too many courtroom shows. A few nervous laughs came from the waiting area. Not real laughter. The kind people offer powerful men when silence might cost them something. Emily Ross, the young compliance officer at the side workstation, stood frozen with a tablet pressed against her chest. Her eyes were fixed on the edge of the check, where the flame had not fully eaten through the fibers. Something in the watermark had caught the light for half a second. She had seen enough trust documents to know ordinary checks did not glow like that under heat. Richard saw her staring. "Emily," he snapped without turning. "Back to your desk." She blinked, swallowed, and stayed still 1 second too long before lowering her eyes. The security guard near the glass entrance shifted his weight. His hand moved toward the radio on his shoulder. James noticed the motion. He noticed everything. The camera above Richard's right shoulder. The second camera tucked into the brass trim above the vault corridor. The scanner sitting closed beside the manager's keyboard. The little red indicator light that meant the counter microphone was recording. He did not mention any of it. "Not yet." "Mr. Whitmore," James said, voice low enough that the room had to quiet itself to hear him. "There is a procedure for certified trust instruments." Richard's face changed. Not much. Just a tightening around the eyes, the small twitch of a man who had been corrected in front of people he needed to impress. "You don't get to say procedure to me." He pressed the lighter closer and fed more flame into the corner of the check. This time, the paper snapped softly, a tiny crackle that seemed louder than it should have been. The smell of scorched cotton drifted over the desk. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." A woman lifted her phone and started recording from behind a potted palm. Richard pointed the smoking check toward James like an accusation. People like you come in here thinking a big number and a serious face will scare us. It won't. I protected this bank from fraud longer than you've owned that jacket. James looked at the burning paper, then at Richard. That check has a registry code. It has a fantasy printed on it. It has a registry code, James repeated. No heat in his voice. No plea. Just the weight of a fact left on the table. The vault behind Richard beeped again. This time Emily heard it. Her eyes lifted toward the steel door. A thin line of amber light pulsed once around the black glass panel, then vanished. The lobby seemed to inhale and hold it. Richard finally turned halfway, annoyed, as if the vault itself had interrupted him. The screen stayed dark. No name, no warning, nothing he could understand. He turned back quickly, deciding the sound meant nothing because he needed it to mean nothing. Security, he said, louder now, escort him out. The guard took one step forward. James did not move. He did not argue with the crowd or explain himself to people who had already chosen the man behind the counter. His fingers rested for 1 second on the worn brown envelope beside the ashtray, close to his father's handwriting, then lifted away. Richard stared at the gesture. What is that supposed to mean? James did not answer. The vault behind Richard beeped a third time, lower now, longer. And this time, the sleeping panel flickered yellow. Hours before the lobby saw fire touch the check. The same brown envelope rested on a small kitchen table beneath James Carter's hand. It was old, not expensive, the corners softened from years of being opened and closed. A faint coffee stain darkened one edge. Across the front, in his father's careful handwriting, were 2 words, Carter Promise. James traced the letters once with his thumb, then stopped himself, as if touching them too long might pull the morning apart. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant hiss of traffic waking up below. Nothing about the room looked like power. A chipped mug sat beside a stack of community grant requests. A wall clock ticked above a narrow bookshelf. Near the window, a framed photograph showed a younger James standing beside his father in front of a small hardware store with a green awning and a hand-painted sign, Carter and Son Tools. His father was smiling in the picture, one arm around James's shoulders, the other hand holding a set of store keys like they were treasure. James picked up the photo and wiped a line of dust from the glass with the cuff of his sleeve. I remember, he said softly. The store had been gone for 22 years. Not because his father stopped working. Not because the neighborhood stopped needing nails, paint, locks, garden hoses, and men who knew how to fix a broken screen door without making you feel foolish. It was gone because one banker behind one desk had looked at Walter Carter's worn jacket, his tired eyes, his black hands, and decided he was a risk before reading the first page of his loan file. James had been 16 then. He remembered the sound of the file sliding back across the desk. He remembered his father standing straight, even while his face went gray. He remembered the manager saying, "Maybe this level of financing isn't for people in your position." His father had not shouted. He had not begged. He had taken the papers, thanked the man for his time, and walked out holding his son's shoulder so firmly that James could feel the tremor in every finger. That night, Walter Carter locked the hardware store for the last time. Before he handed over the keys, he looked at James and said, "Never let them make you beg for what you earned. And if you ever get through a door they kept shut on us, hold it open for somebody else." James set the photograph down carefully. On the table sat a black notebook filled with names, addresses, short notes, and numbers written in blue ink. Mrs. Alvarez, bakery roof repair. Devon Price, barber chair replacement. Holloway daycare, winter heating system. Small people, small businesses, small emergencies that banks often treated like background noise until they became disasters. James turned one page, checked 3 figures, and slipped a certified check into the brown envelope. The check was clean then, untouched. Its seal caught the morning light like something waiting to be understood. He dressed simply because he always did. Charcoal jacket, white shirt, no watch, no driver. He had learned long ago that expensive clothes could make weak men polite, but they could not make them fair. If you have ever been judged by your shoes, your job, your skin, your age, or the size of your bank account before anyone heard your voice, then you already know why James Carter walked into that bank alone. He was not trying to test one manager's manners. He was trying to see whether the door his father had been denied had truly changed, or whether it had only been polished. On his way out, he paused in the hallway when Mrs. Bell from 3C struggled with a paper grocery bag splitting at the bottom. Oranges rolled across the floor. James set the envelope under his arm, knelt, and gathered them before they reached the stairs. "You'll be late," she said, embarrassed. "Not for anything more important than this," James answered. He carried the bag to her door, fixed the torn paper with 2 strips of packing tape from his pocket, and refused the $5 bill she tried to press into his hand. Then his phone vibrated. A secure message lit the screen. Harrington National Private Banking. Legacy Vault Registry Review confirmed. Please arrive before noon. Below was a name he did not recognize yet. Richard Whitmore, General Manager. James stared at the words for a long moment. The hallway seemed to narrow around him. He slipped the phone into his pocket, picked up the brown envelope, and looked once more toward the photograph visible through his half-open door. "Today," he whispered, "we find out if they've changed." Downstairs, the city buses were already sighing at the curb. James walked toward the stop with the envelope flat against his chest, and inside it, the check waited in silence. The bus driver looked at the brown envelope under James Carter's arm and said, "Deliveries go through the back downtown." He didn't say it cruelly. That was almost worse. He said it the way people said things they had already decided were true. James paid his fare, nodded once, and moved down the aisle while 2 morning commuters glanced at his jacket, then at the envelope, then away. No one asked his name. No one asked where he was going. They only made the quiet little calculation people make when they think a man is carrying someone else's important papers. A young mother stood near the rear doors, one hand gripping a stroller, the other trying to keep a toddler from dropping a juice box. When the bus lurched, the stroller rolled sideways. James caught it before the wheels struck the pole. "Thank you," the mother whispered, embarrassed by how close she had come to falling. James only smiled and steadied the brake with his shoe. "You're all right," he said. He gave up his seat to her and stood the rest of the ride with one hand on the rail, the brown envelope flat against his chest. At the next stop, 2 men in tailored suits climbed aboard, talking loudly about a merger neither of them seemed to understand. One of them bumped James's shoulder and did not apologize. The other looked at the envelope and smirked. "Payroll run." James did not answer. He looked past them at the city, sliding by the window. Pawn shops beside new glass towers. Old family restaurants squeezed between banks with gold lettering. The same streets where his father once carried invoices in a cracked leather folder and believed paperwork could be enough if the truth was inside it. Harrington National rose 6 blocks later, a white stone building with brass doors and flags that barely moved in the still morning air. On the front steps, a man in a cashmere coat stepped from a black SUV, and the doorman opened both doors before his shoe touched the curb. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison," the doorman said brightly. When James reached the same doors a few seconds later, the smile thinned. The doorman's eyes dropped to the envelope. "Courier entrance is on Mercer." James held his gaze, calm and even. "I have an appointment with private banking." The doorman hesitated just long enough for the people behind James to notice. A woman in sunglasses made a soft, impatient sound. A businessman checked his watch like James had stolen 30 seconds from him. Finally, the doorman opened one brass door halfway, not both. Security desk first. Inside, the lobby looked less like a bank than a museum where money had been taught to whisper. Marble floors, bronze railings, glass offices, leather chairs arranged so far apart nobody had to hear another person breathe. A digital sign above the reception desk read, "Legacy, Trust, Dignity." James looked at the last word for half a beat longer than the others. At the security desk, a young guard asked for identification, then asked again for the appointment confirmation after already seeing it on James's phone. The guard scanner flashed green, but his face stayed doubtful. "System says walk-in review," he said. "That can't be private vault." James saw the line on the screen upside down. "Legacy Vault Registry Review. Confirmed. Noon." He also saw the smaller line beneath it, half hidden by the guard's thumb. C-T-H, instrument intake. The guard didn't notice. Most people never noticed the line that mattered. "It is," James said. Not sharp, not proud, just exact. A teller at the nearby counter watched the exchange, her fingers hovering over her keyboard. Behind James, two clients stopped talking. One of them whispered, "Is he lost?" James heard it. He adjusted nothing. He simply placed his ID back into his wallet and waited for the guard to decide whether the green light meant what it meant. Then, beside the reception desk, an elderly man dropped a folder. Papers slid across the marble in a white fan. No one moved at first. The receptionist looked annoyed. The clients looked around for someone lower paid to handle it. James bent, gathered the pages in order, and noticed one sheet turned the wrong way, a beneficiary form with the signature line left blank. He tapped it lightly before handing the folder back. "They'll send you upstairs again if this isn't signed." The old man blinked at the page, then at James. "How did you small print?" James said. "It matters." The teller's eyes lifted. The guard looked more uncomfortable now, not less. At the far end of the lobby, a glass door opened onto the private banking corridor. Richard Whitmore stepped out in a navy suit, gold nameplate shining, already frowning as though someone had placed a problem on his floor before he arrived. His gaze landed on James, then on the brown envelope, then on the cluster of people watching. The guard straightened. His radio crackled once. Richard walked toward them slowly, his polished shoes clicking across the marble. "Is this the walk-in with the check?" he asked, loud enough for the lobby to hear. James turned, envelope still in hand. Richard's mouth tightened into a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Private banking is for verified clients," he said, "not men carrying mystery paper through my front door." The security camera above the desk rotated, its tiny red light blinking straight at James. The red light on the security camera blinked once over James Carter's shoulder, small as a pulse. Richard Whitmore saw it too, but only because he had trained himself to notice every device that could protect him. "Answer me," Richard said. "Are you the walk-in with the check?" James did not look away from him. "I'm a scheduled intake for a legacy vault registry review." The words landed differently than Richard expected. Not loud, not defensive, precise. The guard's radio crackled again, and the teller behind the counter stopped pretending to type. Richard's smile tightened. "That's internal language." "It was in the confirmation," James said. "No." Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it cruel without making it private. "The confirmation tells clients where to go. It doesn't teach them how to sound like one." A few people in the lobby shifted. The doorman at the entrance suddenly became interested in the brass handle. The elderly man James had helped held his folder against his chest and watched with a worried crease between his eyes. James opened the brown envelope slowly. The motion made the security guard straighten. No sudden movement, James understood. He had understood it his whole life. He took out the check by its edges and placed it flat on the reception desk, not pushing it forward, not snatching it back. A dark blue seal sat in the upper corner. Beneath the printed amount, thin silver fibers crossed through the paper like veins. Richard glanced at it for less than a second. "That proves nothing." James looked at the scanner beside the guard's terminal. "It proves enough to require intake." Richard laughed once. Require. Certified trust instruments over a threshold must be scanned before rejection. James's eyes moved, briefly, toward the corridor behind Richard, especially when they reference a legacy vault code. Emily Ross had appeared at the side of the private banking entrance with a tablet in one hand. She was young, neat, careful, the kind of employee who had learned to make herself smaller around men who raise their voices in expensive rooms. At James's words, her eyes flicked down to the check, then up to Richard. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, cautious. "If it's tagged legacy compliance usually—" "Emily," Richard cut in. "Not now." The interruption snapped through the lobby like a ruler striking a desk. Emily's mouth closed, but her thumb had already moved across her tablet. James noticed. Richard noticed James noticing. That made him angry in a way the check had not. "You seem very comfortable giving instructions in a building you don't belong in," Richard said. James's hand rested beside the check, still open, visible. I'm not giving instructions. I'm asking you to follow your own. A murmur passed through the two clients behind him. One man whispered, "How would he know that?" The other answered, "Probably rehearsed." James heard both. He said nothing. His attention shifted to the private corridor, where a black glass panel beside the vault entrance sat dormant beneath the bank crest. It was not the main vault door, not yet. Just the registry access panel, polished so clean it reflected Richard's shoes. A tiny amber in the corner blinked once, then disappeared. James's eyes held on it for half a breath too long. Emily saw that too. Richard turned, following James's gaze, then looked back sharply. "What are you staring at?" "Your registry panel is awake," James said. The guard frowned and glanced toward the corridor. "It does that sometimes." "Not from standby," James said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the room. "Not unless an intake instrument is within range." For the first time, Richard did not answer immediately. His jaw moved as if he were chewing on a response that had turned bitter. Behind a reception desk, the teller's fingers hovered above the keyboard. The elderly man looked from the panel to the check, confused but suddenly attentive. Emily's tablet chimed softly. She looked down. Her face changed for 1 second before she hit it. Richard saw the change and moved fast. He reached across the desk and lifted the check off the marble before Emily could speak. "Enough." James's eyes followed the paper, but his body did not move. "That instrument should remain on the counter until intake is complete." "This instrument," Richard said, holding it up between two fingers, "is now under manager review." "That is not the same process." "It is when I say it is." The line came out louder than Richard intended. The lobby heard it. Even the man with the phone by his ear lowered it. Richard looked around and realized he had an audience, so he chose performance over caution. "Security," he said, without taking his eyes off James. "Move him away from the desk." The guard stepped forward. Emily took half a step too, then stopped when Richard lifted one hand at her like a wall. "And Emily," he added, voice cold, "lock the intake screen. No one scans anything until I decide whether this man is attempting fraud." James looked at the check in Richard's hand, then at the camera blinking red above them. His voice stayed even. "You're making a record of the wrong thing." Richard leaned closer, smiling now, because he thought he'd found the insult that would end it. "No, Mr. Carter, I'm making a record of you." The guard's shadow fell across the check as Richard turned toward the private banking doors and said, "Bring him inside. Let's see how long his little performance lasts without an audience." The guard's hand did not touch James Carter's arm, but it hovered close enough for everyone to understand the message. "Move, or I will make you move." Richard Whitmore walked ahead with the check pinched between two fingers, carrying it like evidence in a trial he had already decided. The private banking room sat behind glass walls, meant to look exclusive, not hidden. That was Richard's mistake. The lobby could still see through it. The teller, the elderly man with the folder, Emily at the edge of the corridor, the woman with the phone half raised behind the potted palm. Richard thought he was removing the audience. He was only putting James inside a display case. "Sit," Richard said, pointing to a leather chair across from a black stone conference table. James remained standing for 1 second, long enough to make it clear he was choosing not to argue, then sat. The check lay on the table between them, clean and intact, its silver fibers catching the overhead light like something alive beneath the paper. Richard placed his palm beside it, not on it, close enough to claim ownership without damaging it yet. "Here is what happens now," he said. "You admit you brought in an unverifiable instrument. You leave quietly, and I decide whether this bank reports you." The guard stood near the glass door. His radio hissed softly. Outside, two clients pretended to study brochures while watching every movement through the glass. James looked at the check. "You still haven't scanned it." Richard gave a short laugh. "You are obsessed with that scanner." "No," James said. "You are afraid of it." The room changed temperature. Richard's smile vanished. Emily, just outside the glass, heard the line and froze. Richard turned his head slightly toward her. "Ms. Ross, return to your desk." "Sir," she said carefully, "the intake screen is still showing a pending. That was not a suggestion." Emily lowered her eyes, but she did not move far. Her tablet stayed against her chest, the screen glowing faintly blue. Richard leaned over the table. You think a few procedural words make you clever? I see men like you every quarter. A clean shirt, a rehearsed tone, a document printed on heavy paper. Then the number hits, and suddenly we're supposed to forget what fraud looks like. A murmur slipped through the lobby beyond the glass. James did not look toward it. Fraud has a process too. Fraud has people. Richard tapped the check once with his knuckle. And today it has a name. He turned to the guard. Log him as suspected trust instrument fraud. The guard hesitated. Do you want local law enforcement notified? Richard looked at James when he answered. Not yet. Let's give Mr. Carter one chance to save himself from handcuffs. He pulled a form from a drawer built into the conference table and slid it across with a silver pen. The heading read, Voluntary Withdrawal of Questionable Instrument. James read the first line, then the second. Then he placed the pen back on the paper without signing. This says I acknowledge the instrument is questionable. It is. Not until verified. Richard's face flushed. You don't get to define reality in my bank. Neither do you. Outside the glass, the elderly man shifted his folder under one arm, troubled now. A client in pearls whispered something to her husband, but he shook his head, warning her not to get involved. The guard's radio crackled again, louder this time. Private desk, confirm status. The guard pressed the button. Manager review in progress. Richard smiled at that phrase. Manager review. It sounded clean, official, safe. He picked up the check and held it toward the glass, making sure the people outside could see it. This is what they bring in now, he said, raising his voice. And when we ask questions, they pretend policy is a magic word. James's eyes moved to the security camera in the upper corner of the glass room. Its red light was still blinking. That camera records audio in here. Good, Richard said. Then it will record me protecting this institution. He turned back toward Emily, who had stepped closer again despite herself. Since Mr. Carter loves procedure, let's give him procedure. He placed the check on the small verification pad built into the side table. Not the full scanner James had requested, but the quick fraud pad used for ordinary teller disputes. Emily inhaled sharply. Mr. Whitmore, that pad isn't rated for legacy enough. Richard slammed his finger onto the pad's start button. A red beam ran under the check. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the pad gave a dull error tone. Richard's smile returned. There, but the screen did not say fake. It did not say invalid. It flashed once, then displayed a line Richard had not expected. Secondary trust verification required. Emily saw it through the glass. So did James. Richard's smile stiffened. Beneath the warning, a second line began to form. Just 2 letters before the screen blinked again. C. T. Richard's thumb dropped over the display before anyone else could read more. Richard Whitmore's thumb stayed pressed against the little screen as if skin could erase what light had already shown. CT. 2 letters. Half a clue. Nothing more. But the room behind the glass had seen enough to feel the air change. Emily Ross took 1 step closer, her tablet forgotten against her side. The elderly man in the lobby leaned forward until his folder bent in his hands. The woman behind the potted palm kept recording, but her phone had lowered a few inches, like even the camera was unsure whose side it was on now. Richard lifted the check off the verification pad and snapped the device shut. Glitch, he said. Too fast. James looked at the closed pad, then at Richard's hand covering the display. The pad asked for secondary trust verification. The pad is not your attorney. No, James said. It is your equipment. Emily swallowed. Mr. Whitmore, he's right about one thing. If the quick pad flags secondary verification, we're supposed to move the instrument to the intake scanner before any fraud report is filed. Richard turned slowly toward her. Supposed to? The words were soft, but the threat inside them made her shoulders tighten. You're quoting policy to me now? I'm quoting the screen, she said, barely above a whisper. A silence followed. Not the dead silence that comes after a reveal. Not yet. This was smaller, uneasy, the kind of silence that begins when people realize the person they trusted to be right might be hiding something. Richard's eyes moved from Emily to the lobby. The glass walls had betrayed him. Every little flinch had an audience. He placed the check back on the table, flattening it with 2 fingers. "Fine," he said. "Let's entertain the performance." He slid the check toward the full intake scanner mounted beside the conference wall, a black machine with a blue-lit mouth and a lock plate beneath it. Emily reached for her tablet. "I'll open the intake screen." "No," Richard blocked her with one arm. "I will." He entered his manager code with sharp, angry taps. The scanner woke with a low hum. Blue lights spilled across the table, washing over the check, over James's still hands, over the silver fibers in the paper. For 1 second, the whole room watched the machine do what Richard had refused to do: look before judging. The scanner pulled the check halfway in. A thin beam passed over the seal. The blue light turned white, then gold. Emily's face changed again. A faint watermark rose through the paper, not printed on top, but inside it, woven into the fibers like a ghost under glass. 3 letters shimmered across the corner. City Hush. The scanner chimed once. Not read. Not fraud. Pending. If you're watching this, what do you think those 3 letters are going to open before this is over? Richard stabbed the cancel button before the scan could finish. The scanner released the check with a soft mechanical sigh. "That is enough." Emily's voice broke through before fear could stop it. "Sir, it detected a legacy watermark. It detected decorative paper." "No," James said, still seated. "Decorative paper doesn't trigger protected intake." Richard leaned over him. "You are 1 sentence away from being removed in handcuffs." James looked up. "Then make sure the sentence is recorded." The guard shifted by the glass door, uncomfortable now. His radio hissed again, but he did not answer. Outside, the teller had stopped typing completely. The old man with the folder whispered, "Why won't he just scan it?" Richard heard him. His face hardened. He picked up the brown envelope and shook it once, as if something dishonest might fall out. The faded handwriting on the front caught the light. "Carter Promise." Richard read it, then smirked. "Carter Promise," he said aloud. "Is that what this is? A little family slogan? Something your father wrote on a piece of paper and made you believe was worth money?" James's fingers, resting on the table, curled once. Only once. The movement was so small most of the room missed it. Emily did not. James's eyes dropped to the envelope, and for the first time that morning, something old passed across his face. Not fear, not shame, a memory. Richard saw the flicker and mistook it for weakness. "Let me guess," he said, louder for the glass-walled audience. "Somebody told you doors like this would open for your family one day." He tossed the envelope back onto the table, right beside the check. "Well, Mr. Carter, doors don't open because poor men write promises to themselves." The word struck James harder than Richard knew. The scanner behind them gave one last quiet tone, and on its screen, before Richard could clear it, a locked file icon appeared beside the letter C. "Teach." James stared at the envelope, at his father's handwriting, and said nothing. Richard's words did not echo. They landed and stayed. Poor men write promises to themselves. James Carter kept his eyes on the brown envelope, on the faded letters his father had written with a ballpoint pen more than 20 years ago. Carter Promise. For one breath, the glass room, the vault corridor, the scanner screen, Richard's red face, all of it thinned into another room with cheaper carpet and a banker who smelled like mint gum. James was 16 again, sitting beside Walter Carter in a lone office where the blinds were closed even though the sun was out. His father had worn his best jacket, the brown one with a patched elbow James had polished with a lint brush before they left home. On the desk between them had been a folder thick with receipts, tax records, inventory lists, repair estimates, proof of 21 years of work. The banker had flipped through 3 pages, then stopped pretending. Maybe this level of financing isn't for people in your position. James remembered his father's hand tightening on the folder. He remembered wanting his father to shout, to slam the desk, to make the man take back the words. But Walter Carter only stood, gathered every page in order, and said, "Thank you for your time." Outside, in the parking lot, he had held the folder against his chest the same way James held the envelope now. "Son," he had said, voice steady but eyes wet. Never let a locked door teach you to hate doors. Just build one that opens better. The memory vanished when Richard tapped the envelope with one finger. Nothing to say now? Richard asked. You had plenty to say when you were quoting policy. James lifted his eyes slowly. The pain was still there, but it had not made him smaller. My father wrote that after a bank told him his life's work didn't qualify as value. The lobby beyond the glass grew still. Even the woman recording lowered her phone a little, as if the sentence had made the room too human to treat like entertainment. Richard's expression barely moved. That is unfortunate, he said. It is also irrelevant. Emily flinched at the coldness in his voice. She looked at the scanner screen again. The locked file icon still glowed beside C, T, H, refusing to disappear. Mr. Whitmore, she said, we need to preserve that screen. If there's a locked legacy file, compliance has to... Compliance, Richard snapped, does not run this room. No, James said quietly. But it records it. Richard turned on him. Do not hide behind her. James looked at Emily, then back at Richard. I'm not hiding. I'm making sure she doesn't pay for telling the truth. That made Emily's face tighten, not with fear this time, but with something closer to shame. She had been standing inside glass walls for 3 years, watching powerful people decide which customers deserve patience. She had told herself procedure was protection. Now the procedure was on the screen, and the man in charge was trying to bury it with his thumb. Richard saw the shift in her and moved quickly to crush it. He snatched the voluntary withdrawal form from the table and slapped it in front of James. The sound cracked through the room. Then protect yourself, he said. Sign this. State that you presented an unverifiable instrument, attempted to force access to private banking, and voluntarily withdrew when questioned. James read the page without touching the pen. The check lay beside the envelope. The scanner hummed softly behind it, blue light fading at the edges. That statement is false. That statement is generous. Richard leaned in until his reflection stretched across the black stone table. I could call police. I could blacklist you from every Harrington branch in the state. I could make sure every bank that sees your name sees one word first. He tapped the form. Fraud. The guard shifted by the door, uncomfortable with the word but not brave enough to challenge it. Outside the glass, the elderly man James had helped lowered his folder to his side. A teller stared at the floor. One client in pearls whispered, "This doesn't feel right," but her husband touched her elbow, warning her to stay quiet. James looked at the pen, then at the envelope. His father's handwriting looked tired under the overhead lights, but not defeated. My father signed papers he should never have signed, James said, because he thought being polite would make them fair. Richard smiled. And how did that work out for him? Emily whispered, "Sir." The word came out before she could stop it. James did not rise. He did not insult Richard. He did not use the one truth that would have ended the room. He only moved the pen back across the table with 2 fingers. I don't sign lies. Richard stared at the pen as if it had disobeyed him too. Then his face settled into something harder. He picked up the check and the envelope, walked to the glass door, and opened it wide to the lobby. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice, "Mr. Carter has refused to cooperate with a fraud review." Every head turned. The guard stepped behind James. Richard held the check high enough for the lobby to see. Since he wants an audience, let's give him one. Richard Whitmore stepped out of the glass room first, holding the check in one hand and the brown envelope in the other, as if he had dragged the truth out by its collar. James Carter followed behind him with the guard close at his back. The lobby turned toward them in pieces. The teller's hands froze above her keyboard. The man with the phone stopped pretending to talk. The woman in pearls looked from James to the check, then quickly looked down, afraid her own face might reveal too much sympathy. Richard moved to the center of the private banking lobby, right beneath the digital sign that read Legacy. Trust. Dignity. Everyone should understand what happens when someone attempts to abuse this institution, he announced. His voice filled the marble room easily. He had practiced this kind of authority for years. Mr. Carter brought in a questionable instrument, refused to complete a voluntary withdrawal, and attempted to pressure my staff with language he clearly does not understand. Emily stood just inside the glass doorway, pale, her tablet clutched with both hands. On her screen, the intake window still showed the locked file icon beside the 3 letters Richard had tried to bury. C'était hush. She angled the tablet closer to her chest before Richard could see her looking at it. James saw. He gave no sign. Richard laid the check on the black stone counter where everyone could see it. Then he placed the brown envelope beside it, front facing up. Carter promise. A few people squinted at the faded handwriting. One man near the waiting chairs gave a dry little laugh, the kind of laugh that asks permission from power before it becomes real. A promise, Richard said, tapping the envelope. That is touching. Unfortunately, promises are not currency. The guard shifted uncomfortably. The elderly man James had helped earlier stepped half an inch forward, then stopped when Richard's eyes cut toward him. Public pressure has a weight. You could feel it in the way people held their breath without knowing they were doing it. James stood in the center of that weight, hands at his sides, shoulders square. He did not look embarrassed. That bothered Richard more than fear would have. Sign the form, Richard said, sliding the voluntary withdrawal paper onto the counter in front of him. Leave now. This can still end quietly. James looked at the paper, then at the check. Quietly is not the same as truthfully. A murmur passed through the lobby. Richard's jaw tightened. He turned the form toward the crowd like an exhibit. He refuses to cooperate. I refuse to lie. You refuse to understand your position. Richard leaned closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide it. You are standing on my floor, under my cameras, surrounded by my staff, asking my bank to pretend this fantasy has value. He stabbed one finger toward the check. That is your position. Behind the counter, the teller glanced up at the security camera. The small red light blinked steadily. Emily noticed it too. Richard did not. He was too busy winning. He reached over and tapped his manager code into the nearest terminal. The screen behind the counter changed with a clean electronic chirp. Manager override. Intake access suspended. A second line appeared beneath it. Customer review. Hold. Richard smiled, as though the machine had just applauded him. There, he said. The system agrees. Emily whispered, almost to herself, No, it doesn't. The teller heard her and looked sharply over. James did not move. His eyes stayed on the words customer review. Hold. He knew what Richard had done. Not proof. Not judgment. A lock placed by the very man pretending it was a verdict. Richard picked up the check again and held it high, turning slightly so the lobby phones could catch the image. This is what fraud looks like when it walks through a front door wearing dignity like a costume. The words landed hard. The woman recording lowered her phone for a moment, then lifted it again, closer this time. The elderly man's mouth tightened. The guard looked at James, waiting for anger, waiting for some excuse to make the situation simple. James gave him none. He only said, You should be careful what you call worthless in front of witnesses. Richard laughed, but the sound had an edge now. Witnesses? He swept his hand toward the lobby. Good. Let them witness me in this. He walked back behind the counter, opened the manager's drawer, and removed the silver lighter. Emily took a step forward. Mr. Whitmore, don't. Richard placed the lighter beside the check, its polished metal catching the cold light. Then he looked at James and smiled. One final lesson, he said. Fake paper burns the same as real paper. Richard Whitmore picked up the silver lighter with the calm of a man who believed the room belonged to him. The little metal lid snapped open, sharp and bright in the marble silence. Emily Ross took another step forward. Mr. Whitmore, that is a financial instrument. Richard did not look at her. It is a prop. He held the check between his thumb and forefinger, high enough for the lobby to see the seal, the heavy paper, the faint silver fibers threaded through it. A prop used by people who think a serious face can replace verification. James Carter stood on the public side of the counter, the guard close behind him, the brown envelope resting beside the withdrawal form like something already judged and sentenced. Carter promise. The words faced up toward the ceiling lights. James looked at them once. Only once. Then he looked at the check. Put it down, he said. Not loud. not pleading. Richard smiled. There it is. The voice of a man who suddenly understands consequences. A few people in the lobby shifted, but no one spoke. The woman behind the potted palm kept filming. The elderly man with the folder had gone pale. The teller's hand trembled near her keyboard. Emily's tablet glowed against her jacket, still holding the locked C.T.H. file Richard refused to acknowledge. Richard turned slightly so every camera, every client, every employee could see him. Let the record show, he said, performing for the room, that Mr. Carter refused a reasonable opportunity to withdraw his questionable document. James's eyes moved to the security camera above the counter. Its red light blinked steadily. The record will show what you do next. Richard's mouth twitched. He flicked the lighter. Flame rose, small and blue at the base, orange at the tip. A soft sound passed through the lobby, not a gasp exactly, but the beginning of one. Emily's voice came out tighter now. Sir, please don't. You work for me, Ms. Ross. I work for the bank. That made Richard turn. For half a second, something dangerous flashed across his face. Then he laughed softly, as if she had made a childish mistake. And who do you think represents the bank on this floor? He brought the flame to the corner of the check. The paper did not catch at first. It darkened, curled, resisted. Richard pressed the flame closer. The corner browned, then blackened, then sparked with a tiny line of orange. The smell of scorched cotton drifted across the counter. Someone whispered, "He's burning it." James did not move. The guard looked at him, almost hoping he would lunge, shout, do anything that would make Richard's story easier to believe. James gave him nothing. His hands stayed open at his sides. His voice stayed low. You still have time to stop. Richard leaned in, letting the flame eat another inch. No, Mr. Carter. You had time. You wasted it pretending you belonged here. The words hit the room differently now. The first insults had made people uncomfortable. This one made them ashamed. The man with the phone lowered it from his ear. The woman in pearls covered her mouth. The elderly man took one step forward, then stopped when the guard shifted. The check snapped softly as one burned edge folded inward. For one brief second, under the heat, something shimmered near the upper seal. 3 ghost-pale letters appeared inside the paper, brighter than ink. C.T.H. Emily saw them. The teller saw them. Richard saw them too. His face tightened, and he quickly tilted the burning corner toward the metal ashtray, hiding the mark from the lobby. Cheap tricks, he muttered, but his voice had lost its smoothness. He dropped the burning edge into the tray and pressed it down with the lighter's metal side, smearing ash across the seal. There, he said louder, forcing the old confidence back into his throat. Problem solved. The check lay wounded in the tray, not destroyed, but scarred. The seal was blackened at one edge. A curl of smoke rose from the paper and drifted toward the digital sign above them. Legacy, trust, dignity. James looked at that sign, then at the envelope with his father's handwriting. Richard mistook the silence for defeat. He picked up the voluntary withdrawal form again and slapped it beside the ashtray. Now sign, or I call this in as attempted fraud and destruction of bank property caused by your refusal to cooperate. Emily stared at him. You burned it. Richard's eyes cut toward her. He forced escalation. James finally turned his head toward Emily, just enough to stop her from stepping into Richard's trap. Don't argue with him, he said quietly. Let the system finish listening. Richard laughed once. The system. He reached toward the terminal to clear the manager override. Before his finger touched the key, the private vault corridor behind him gave a low electronic tone. Not the small beep from before. This one was deeper, longer, impossible to mistake. The black glass panel beside the steel vault door woke from sleep. Amber light ran around its edges in a slow circle. The lobby went still. Even Richard's hand froze above the keyboard. On the panel, white letters began loading one line at a time. Protected trust instrument damaged. Owner registry accessing. The words on the vault panel glowed so bright they seemed to pull the air out of the lobby. Protected trust instrument damaged. Owner registry accessing. No one moved. The last curl of smoke rose from the ashtray in a thin gray ribbon, twisting beneath the sign that still promised legacy, trust, dignity. Richard Whitmore's finger hung above the keyboard, frozen half an inch from the key he had meant to press. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. For the first time all morning, the room heard what silence sounded like inside a bank built for secrets. The coffee machine behind the reception desk stopped hissing. A phone call on speaker crackled and went unanswered. The woman recording lowered her phone just enough to look at the vault with her own eyes. The elderly man clutched his folder to his chest. The guard took one small step away from James Carter without seeming to realize he had done it. Emily Ross stared at the panel, her face pale under the blue-white light. "That's not a fraud alert," she whispered. Richard snapped his head toward her. "Quiet." His voice cracked on the word. He heard it, and so did everyone else. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder. "It's a system error. The heat must have triggered something in the paper. Nothing more." But the vault did not behave like an error. A ring of amber light moved around the black glass panel in a slow, deliberate circle. Then a second line appeared beneath the first. Legacy Registry handshake initiated. Emily's tablet chimed. The teller's terminal chimed. Even the small verification pad inside the glass room gave a delayed tone, like the whole floor was waking up piece by piece to something Richard had tried to bury. James stood exactly where he had been standing before the tone. His hands were still open at his sides. His face did not change. Only his eyes moved from the damage check to the vault panel, as if he had been waiting for the room to listen to what he had already known. Richard saw that calm, and it frightened him more than the screen. "Turn it off," he barked. "Emily, cancel the registry access." Emily looked at her tablet, then back at him. "I can't. That was not a request." "No, sir." Her voice was low, but steadier now. I can't. The registry is locked above branch authority." A murmur passed through the lobby. Not laughter this time. Not judgment. Fear, curiosity, embarrassment, all braided together. The man who had smirked earlier stopped smiling. The woman in pearls looked directly at James for the first time, not at his jacket, not at the envelope, but at his face. Richard stepped toward the vault corridor. "I'm the general manager of this floor." The panel answered with another tone. "Access route escalated. Trust operations notified." The words reflected across Richard's polished shoes. He looked down, then back at the crowd, furious that a machine had corrected him publicly. "This is internal," he said, pointing toward the lobby. "Everyone put your phones away." No one moved fast enough. The woman behind the potted palm kept recording. The elderly man lifted his chin. The teller's hand hovered near her keyboard, but she did not close the screen. Richard turned on James. "What did you do?" James looked at the burned check in the tray. "I asked you to scan it. What did you put in that paper?" "A registry code." "That is not an answer. It is the answer you refused." The words were not loud, but they struck the marble harder than Richard's shouting ever had. Emily stepped closer to the counter. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "the damaged instrument alert is tied to the same Teach watermark. The scanner saw it. The quick pad saw it. The vault is seeing it now." Richard's face tightened. "You are done speaking?" "No," James said quietly. Everyone looked at him. He did not raise his voice. "Let her finish the sentence you kept interrupting." The lobby held its breath again. "Before the full name appears, ask yourself who is about to be more shocked, the man who burned the check or the people who watched him do it." The vault panel dimmed for 1 second, then brightened. A new line began to load, letter by letter. "Owner registry match found." Richard stared at the words, as if staring hard enough could make them disappear. His hand drifted toward the burned check, maybe to move it, maybe to hide it, maybe to prove he still controlled something on that counter. Emily saw him reach and said, "Don't touch it." This time, Richard obeyed before he realized he had obeyed. The amber ring around the vault turned gold. The panel clicked softly, like a lock deciding whether to open. Then the final line began to appear beneath the registry match. "Owner." The panel finished the name one letter at a time, each character landing like a hammer in the silence. "Owner." James Carter. No one breathed. The gold light widened across the black glass. Then the second line appeared beneath it. Carter Trust Holdings. For a moment, the lobby did not understand what it was seeing. The same man Richard Whitmore had accused, cornered, mocked, and publicly shamed was now standing in front of a vault that had just called him owner. James did not smile. He did not look victorious. He looked at the words the way a man looks at a grave marker, with memory underneath the calm. Richard took one step back. "No," he said. Not loud, not commanding, just naked disbelief. The vault panel chimed again. Controlling trustee verified. Protected instrument status damaged. Emily Ross's tablet lit up in her hands. This time she did not hide it. She stepped forward, turned the screen toward the counter, and her voice, though still quiet, carried through the marble room. "The registry match is valid." Richard turned on her. "You don't know what valid means." Emily swallowed once, then touched the tablet. The quick pad flagged secondary verification. The intake scanner detected the C.T.H. legacy watermark. The vault registry just matched the damaged instrument to the controlling trustee. She looked at James, then back at Richard. "That is what valid means." A sound moved through the lobby, not a gasp anymore, but the slow collapse of certainty. The man who had laughed at the envelope stared at the floor. The woman in pearls pressed her fingers to her mouth. The guard moved another step away from James, as if distance might erase the fact that he had stood behind the wrong man. Richard lifted a hand toward the panel. "This is impossible. Carter Trust Holdings doesn't have public-facing access. It's a dormant legacy account." James finally looked at him. It was never dormant. Richard's face lost color. Before he could answer, the teller's terminal rang with an internal video call. The screen behind the counter flashed. "Trust Operations, Evelyn Shaw." Emily answered before Richard could stop her. A woman's face appeared on the monitor, silver hair pulled back, eyes sharp behind rimless glasses. Her voice came through the lobby speakers because the system had routed the damaged instrument alert to every active terminal on the private floor. "Who authorized manual destruction of a protected Carter Trust instrument?" Richard reached for the keyboard. "Evelyn, this is Richard Whitmore. We have a suspected fraud incident. I did not ask for your interpretation, Mr. Whitmore." The room froze again. Evelyn Shaw's eyes moved to the vault readout, then to James. Her expression changed with immediate recognition. "Mr. Carter." The two words landed harder than the full registry. Not because the machine had said them, but because a person with authority had. James gave a small nod. "Ms. Shaw." Richard stared between them. "You know him?" Evelyn's voice sharpened. "Everyone above branch level knows Mr. James Carter." Another silence. Then she added, slowly, so there would be no room left for Richard to hide inside. "He is the controlling trustee of Carter Trust Holdings and the beneficial owner attached to the private vault division you are standing in." The elderly man's folder slipped from under his arm and hit the marble with a soft slap. No one bent to pick it up. Richard's mouth opened and closed once. That check was presented irregularly. Emily's eyes flicked to the scanner log. It was presented for scheduled Legacy Vault Registry review at 11:58. He refused to cooperate. He refused to sign a false withdrawal statement. The instrument was questionable. James looked at the ashtray. The check lay there, blackened at one corner, smoke gone now, damage remaining. "You made it questionable when you chose fire over procedure." The words did not need volume. They carried because the room had finally learned to listen. Evelyn's face hardened on the monitor. "Emily, preserve all scanner logs, audio, counter video, manager override history, and the damaged instrument." "Yes, ma'am," Emily said, and this time her voice did not shake. Richard stepped toward the counter. "I can explain this." James turned to him fully. "You already did." Richard stopped. "On camera, in front of your staff, in front of your clients, in front of the vault." The woman behind the potted palm still had her phone raised. The red dot blinked on her screen. The teller's camera blinked above the counter. The vault panel glowed behind Richard with James's name still burning in gold. Evelyn spoke again, colder now. "Mr. Whitmore, step away from the instrument." Richard did not move. Maybe he could not. James looked past him to the brown envelope on the counter, the faded words "Carter Promise" still visible beside the ashtray. Then he asked the only question that made the power in the room feel suddenly heavier than money. How many people did you treat this way when there wasn't a vault behind them to answer back? Richard Whitmore had no answer. The question sat between him and James Carter like a ledger open to a page he had never expected anyone to read. How many people did you treat this way when there wasn't a vault behind them to answer back? The lobby stayed silent, not because people had nothing to say, but because every person there knew the question had left Richard and reached them too. The woman in pearls looked down at her own shoes. The man who had laughed at the envelope slowly put his phone in his pocket. The guard stared at the floor where his shadow fell behind James, remembering exactly where he had chosen to stand. On the monitor, Evelyn Shaw's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Whitmore, surrender your access card to security." Richard blinked as if the words were in another language. "Evelyn, this is being blown out of proportion. You destroyed a protected trust instrument after 2 verification systems warned you not to. I made a judgment call. You made a public example of a client you did not verify." The words struck him harder than anger would have. Emily moved to the terminal, her hand steady now. She opened the manager override history. The screen showed each step in clean, merciless order. Intake access suspended. Customer review, hold. Scan canceled by manager. Voluntary withdrawal form generated. Protected instrument damaged. Richard watched the list appear, and for the first time all morning, his title did nothing for him. Evelyn continued, "Your branch authority is suspended pending formal review. Security, collect Mr. Whitmore's badge and access device." The guard looked up sharply. For half a second, he seemed uncertain whether he was allowed to obey a voice from a screen over the man who had been giving orders 5 minutes ago. Then the vault panel behind Richard pulsed gold again, and the choice became simple. He stepped toward Richard. "Sir," he said, quieter than before, "your card." Richard's hand went to the badge clipped to his jacket. The gold nameplate still read General Manager. His fingers trembled as he removed the access card beneath it and placed it on the counter beside the ashtray. The card hit the stone with a small plastic click. The same sound a room makes when power becomes temporary. James did not watch with pleasure. He looked at the burned check, at the blackened corner, at the brown envelope with Carter Promise written across it, and then at Emily. "Preserve the original," he said. "Not for me, for the review." Emily nodded. "Every file?" Evelyn asked from the monitor. James turned back to the screen. "Every client Richard marked suspicious without full verification for the last 5 years. Every declined trust intake. Every manual override. Every complaint buried under manager discretion." A murmur moved through the lobby. The elderly man bent slowly and picked up his fallen folder, holding it now with both hands. The teller looked at Richard, then at Emily, then quietly opened a second secure archive window on her terminal. Richard's face hardened with panic. You can't open 5 years of records because of one misunderstanding. James looked at him then. Really looked. This was not a misunderstanding. His voice stayed calm, and that calm made the words heavier. A misunderstanding is when someone reads a number wrong. You looked at me and decided the truth was impossible. No one spoke. Even Evelyn let the sentence breathe. Richard swallowed. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter." The apology came too late and too small, folded around fear instead of remorse. James did not accept it. He did not reject it. He simply said, "An apology to me does not fix a system that taught you you could do this." Evelyn's expression changed, not softened, exactly, but steadied. "Mr. Carter, I'll initiate an emergency compliance audit. Independent review. External counsel. Mandatory reporting to the board. Includes service discrimination," James said. "Not just instrument handling." Emily looked up at him. There was gratitude in her face, but also something like responsibility. "And staff retaliation?" she asked. Richard turned toward her sharply. Emily did not look away this time. James nodded. "Especially that." Evelyn said, "Ms. Ross, you will lead the initial evidence hold until the external team arrives." Emily inhaled, startled. "Me? You followed procedure when your manager would not." Richard gave a bitter laugh. but it died before becoming sound. The guard removed his access card from the system. Behind Richard, the terminal changed from green to red. Access revoked. The color washed across his suit, across the ashtray, across the check he had tried to reduce to nothing. James picked up the brown envelope and slid the damaged check into it with careful hands. He did not hide the burn mark. He let show. Then he turned to the lobby, to the clients, the teller, the guard, the woman still recording, the old man clutching his folder. "This bank will be reviewed," he said, "but so will the silence that allowed this room to watch." No one defended themselves. That was not the moment for it. Evelyn's voice came softer through the speaker. "Mr. Carter, what would you like done with the Carter Trust disbursement scheduled today?" James looked at the envelope, then toward the front doors beyond the marble lobby. Outside, the city moved on, full of people who would never know a vault had spoken for them. "Hold it until tomorrow," he said. "I want the first check issued somewhere. No one has to prove they deserve dignity before they receive help." Emily glanced at the burned corner inside the envelope. "Where?" James looked once at his father's handwriting. "My father's old neighborhood." By the next morning, the marble lobby at Herring National had already changed in ways that expensive buildings hate to admit they can change. Richard Whitmore's nameplate was gone from the black stone counter. The empty rectangle where it had sat looked brighter than the rest of the desk, a clean patch left behind by something that had been there too long. A printed notice stood beside the intake scanner. All trust instruments must be verified by procedure before judgment. Emily Ross placed it there herself before the branch opened. Her hands were steady now. The same scanner Richard had tried to control sat humming beside her, waiting for the first honest use of the day. She had spent the night preserving files, copying logs, locking audio, tagging overrides, and sending 5 years of suspicious client reviews into a secure audit folder. Not revenge. Record. There is a difference. At 9:17 a.m., James Carter walked in through the same brass doors, wearing the same charcoal jacket. This time, the doorman opened both doors. James noticed. He did not smile at the man's embarrassment. He simply nodded and walked past him, because dignity was not making someone crawl after they learned to stand differently. Emily met him near the vault corridor. "Mr. Carter," she said, not loudly, not for performance. With respect, James handed her the brown envelope. The burned check was inside, sealed in a clear evidence sleeve now. One corner blackened. The C.T.H. watermark still faintly visible beneath the scar. "Keep the original with the review," he said. "Make sure they remember what it costs to ignore a person." Emily looked at the faded words on the envelope. "Carter promise." And the disbursement. James turned toward the front doors, where morning light spilled across the marble floor. Not here. 2 hours later, a folding table stood on the sidewalk in James's father's old neighborhood, in front of a row of storefronts that had survived by stubbornness more than money. The green awning of Carter and Son Tools was gone, replaced years ago by a discount pharmacy that had closed too. But the bricks were still the same. James could see his father's hands in them, even where the paint had peeled. A small crowd gathered without being told exactly what was happening. Mrs. Alvarez from the bakery came first, wiping flour from her wrists onto her apron. Devin Price arrived from the barbershop with a cracked appointment book under one arm. The director of Holloway Daycare stood near the curb with 2 children holding her coat. These were the names from James's black notebook. Small businesses, small emergencies, people banks called too risky until risk became ruin. Emily stood beside the table with a portable scanner and a stack of clean documents. No vidvitroops, no glass wall, no guard deciding who looked like they belonged. James placed a new check on the table. The paper was crisp, untouched, its seal catching the sunlight instead of fire. Mrs. Alvarez stared at it, then at him. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," James told her. "Fix the roof before the next rain." Her eyes filled. She pressed one hand to her mouth, then reached for the check as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. James did not let go until she had a full grip on it. That mattered. No one was handing her charity. She was receiving what someone should have believed she was worth from the beginning. Across the street, An old man watched from a bus stop. A boy beside him whispered, "Is he famous?" The old man shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "He just remembered where he came from." Later, when the last form was signed and the folding chairs were stacked, James returned alone to the old storefront. He unlocked the temporary office they had set up inside, where dust still lived in the corners and sunlight came through the front window in soft squares. On the wall, Emily had hung 2 frames. In one was the photograph of Walter Carter in front of Carter and Son Tools, smiling with the store keys in his hand. In the other was the burned check, sealed behind glass, the blackened corner visible beside the faint watermark. James stood before them for a long time. Then he took a small brass plaque from his pocket and fixed it beneath the frames. It read, "Carter Trust Community Fund." Beneath that, in smaller letters, "Never let a locked door teach you to hate doors. Build one that opens better." James stepped back. Outside, Mrs. Alvarez turned the new check over in her hands while her daughter laughed through tears. Devin Price unlocked his barber shop. The daycare children chased each other along the sidewalk, their shoes slapping the concrete in the bright afternoon. No vault lit up. No crowd went silent. No manager held fire over someone else's dignity. There was only a door standing open, and James Carter watching people walk through it.